get started here. So, I'm gonna let you, Daniela, introduce yourself first, if you don't mind.
Sure. Hi, my name is Daniela Fass. I'm an assistant professor and the director of lab and fabrication operations here at Olin College.
And I work with Daniela at Olin College. My name's Callan Bignoli, as I said, and I am the director of the library there at Olin. And it might seem like an unlikely partnership that the machine shop director and the library director are pals, but we do a lot of stuff together, and we're going to talk to you today about some of the successes we've had in trying to make both of our spaces more inclusive for more types of people. Okay, so on these purple slides here, the purple text, these are sort of the frameworks for today, like where you have a couple different chapters of this presentation, and our first one here is on outcomes, missions, and values. And we're going to talk to you about how the objectives of the library and the shop and our mission and values are similar and also reflect that of our parent institution. And before we dive into that, though, we did want to take some time to talk a little bit about the state of demographic use in makerspaces. So we're actually working on another paper right now where we had to do some research on this topic. And there's really not a lot of data that has been collected around different demographics of makerspace users. Also, you can see here that this particular survey was done in 2015, so that's now 7 years old. And there really hasn't been too much that we have seen out there that has updated since. I think, too, that the pandemic dealt makerspaces an especially difficult blow because they're not really something that can be virtualized in many ways, although a lot of libraries got really creative around that type of programming during the pandemic and continuing today. So from this survey of makerspaces here, we see that there's roughly around 64% or 2/3 of all users are white, able-bodied males in makerspaces. We work at a college of engineering, and engineering is a very traditionally masculinized profession. One of the things that I think we appreciate most about our college is that we have always had a commitment to gender equity. As we move away from thinking about things in a binary, it's getting harder for us to sort of split up those stats. But we do have 50% of students are assigned female at birth, 50% are assigned male at birth, and we have a very large LGBTQIA+ community on campus. And to continue to set the scene a little bit here, I wanted to share a couple of quotes here, and I'll move Daniela's box out of the way for a second. So the first one at the top here says that women are undercounted as makers because of the type of making that they do, and many of them avoid makerspaces, the community-operated workspaces that tend to be dominated by men. And this was a quote from Susan Faulkner, who is a UX and makerspace researcher at Intel. And our own colleague, Debbie Chatra, who is a material scientist and professor, wrote a really amazing article in The Atlantic in 2015 called Why I Am Not a Maker. It's listed in the references list in the slides, which you'll get access to at some point. And in her article, she writes, almost all the artifacts that we value as a society were made by or at the order of men. But behind everyone is a invisible infrastructure of labor, primarily caregiving in its various aspects, that is mostly performed by women. Okay. Daniela, do you want to take this slide?
Sure. So, like Callan said, even within our college, we haven't been able to sort of track or get good data. So while we track, who is applying to our college, there's just a general lack of data, period, of who actually uses not just our spaces, but in general, who is in these maker spaces. So our goal for this discussion is to really think about how can we actually increase our diversity across these spaces. And again, we'll talk a little bit about why the library and the shop spaces, why is it that we work together, right? And that will be a big chunk of this talk. But in general, we as you can see from the research, there's not great data available A lot of that is just anecdotal. We know the students, we know who's in the spaces, but we don't actually have, we can't actually count on that anecdotal data to drive much more than just we just know who's in the space. So the other thing that we haven't really talked about yet in shop spaces either is sort of this idea around physical disabilities. So makerspaces, shop spaces in general are disadvantaging people that are not able-bodied. And so one of the area that we have that need to improve is certainly the area of access for wheelchair users and a whole bunch of other non-able-bodied people to actually use spaces. We have been thinking quite a bit about this idea around physical disabilities, learning disabilities, and so we are trying to make adjustments for our students in those regards. For example, the one nice thing about COVID has been that we've been video recording all of our trainings, and so students now have access to videos of our trainings. They can also get closed caption. So that's been a massive improvement for our student body. But like Helen said before, we don't have an actual data available for understanding who's actually using our spaces.
All right, so that is a definite problem here, right? Is there is not a lot of research that's been done into any sort of specific demographics. There's been a lot of studies that have focused on gender and some on race, not many, and most of them are, over 5 years old at this point. And then when you get sort of more in depth around looking at different demographics around ability, neurodivergence, gender identity, things like that, the data gets even more sparse. So to do some stage setting here, are any of you actually familiar with Olin College? Somewhat, yeah. So Olin College is a very interesting place. It's only been around for about 25 years. And we've only had, our oldest alums are 37, 38 years old. So we have not been around very long. We are a very project-based and student-centered institution of higher ed. And the way that this looks for us is there's a really big focus on student autonomy around project choices. There's a lot of idea around participatory design with students and co-creation of knowledge with them. We also do a lot of work with students where they help us run our spaces. And this is particularly true in the library and the shops. We'll get into this a little bit more later, but we have a pretty robust peer training model in both of our departments that make this possible. So for library folks, the way that this plays out for me in terms of staffing is I have one staff member, other than me, and they are a librarian. And then I have 8 student workers who make up sort of another additional person, but they are all doing very different things. So in my team, the way that looks is 4 of them are library assistants, and then 4 of them help us run the sort of specialized equipment that we have in the library. So that includes our workroom, which has a vinyl cutter and screen printer, a podcasting studio, camera and audio-visual equipment, and sewing machine. And so we think very much about a continuum between our departments, Daniela and I, because we both present makerspace opportunities and creative opportunities. Not only for their hobbies and interests, but also these things are embedded in our curriculum, and we'll talk about that more later. And what the shop offers is just different from what the library offers. We don't have things in the library that you can really aggressively hurt or maim yourself with. Yes, you can sew through your finger, and I have done that before, and y'all who've watched Project Runway have certainly seen people doing that before. But for the most part, we try to compartmentalize what is in the library, what is safe to be used in there, taking into consideration things like the specialized training that needs to happen in the shops for certain types of machining to happen, and also things like ventilation, for example. So we used to have 3D printers in the library, decided against that for a few reasons. Daniela, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, so I supervise 5 professional staff, and then It ranges from between 16 to 22 students that work for the shop spaces. So we have cutters, we have your traditional metal fabrication tools, we have a full set of welding equipment. So we're essentially set up to do both plastic fabrication, but also wood and metal fabrication. So we're fully staffed out with a water jet cutters. We have all of the tools that you would see at a major college as well.
Yeah, so we touched a little bit on this already, but we do at Olin prioritize our sort of pedagogical shift in how we teach engineering to students. So there is this, lots of co-creation, lots of project-based learning. There's also a lot of teamwork. And one of the things that our makerspaces help us foster, both in the library and in the shops, is teamwork together. And we have really developed a curriculum at Olin that goes beyond sort of traditional fabrication environments and lets students define what that's going to look like for them. So I always like to brag about this very cool class that we teach everybody in their first semester at Olin. That's called Design Nature. And Design Nature is a class that takes inspiration from the natural world to create ultimately a game for fifth graders at a local elementary school to play at the end of the semester. So things like this, things in this class have included stuff like there was a group last semester that had penguins as their inspiration, and they made a very well done egg that was 3D printer encased and had some circuit boards that they had modified and created to basically make it so that if you were waddling like a penguin with the egg between your legs and you were doing it right, then it wouldn't buzz. And then if you separated your ankles at all and were like dropping the egg, it would start to buzz and indicate that you had messed up. So there's lots of really creative things that come out of that class. And the students who are in that class use things in the shop and in the libraries to get that work done. Usually that whole semester for me, between about halfway through to the end, is just seeing costumes being made, parts of giraffes that are just like hanging, or like stuffed pieces of giraffe costumes, lots of paint, lots of people cutting up cardboard, and and Daniela has a lot of business in the shop as well with students who want to do things that are more sophisticated, like that egg I mentioned. And we also really try to empower our staff and faculty colleagues to participate in things as well. Students are our number one customer. They do sort of define life at Olin, but we get really, really excited when staff and faculty want to take part in these things with us as well. Danielle, do you want to add anything here?
No, and again, so one of the things that's unique about us is that we actually take our students, all first year incoming students are getting a basic shop training. So they all get trained within the first 2 or 3 weeks of when they're actually setting their foot on campus, which is very unusual to, I feel like I didn't get trained in college until maybe my junior year. So all of them get trained on the basic machine shop tools.
Yes, and like I mentioned, this class, Design Nature happens in the first semester, and then many courses have major fabrication projects as a part of them. Those things range from being a couple weeks to a whole semester, often on teams of 2 to 5 students. In the Design Nature class, it's usually 3 or 4 students per team. And we have also an institutional focus on doing good in the world. And I think this, for me, the way that I sort of interpret this in terms of empowering people in makerspaces is I really believe that makerspaces are an opportunity for people to create their own worlds in their own communities. And when you empower students to do that work and be good stewards of a community space, you are setting the seeds for good participants in democracy and society. I think now, Daniela, here's some shop and lab specific stuff.
So what we wanted to ensure that our shops essentially are accessible for the entire community. We were very intentional on setting our mission, and so historically shops have been run by older white men. That's clearly not where we want our shops to be representative of. So um, we set our mission to be collaborative for learning and innovation, a space to learn, invent, iterate, create, and mentor. And one of the things that's actually missing here is actually to make mistakes. So we are not a punitive space. Our main focus is that it is a learning space. So if something does break, this is an opportunity. It's a learning opportunity, right? And it's not a you just broke this, you have to leave this space. That's not how we approach things. Our water jet is $150,000. Again, we want to strive to make this accessible for our students, and so we put the right boundaries in place where our training and our safety measures are are enabling us to really get our students onto these machines, and we actually don't worry too much about things breaking. And so we've shifted over the last 6 years, we've shifted our shop space from sort of a more traditional shop space where you have to come in with a drawing and be ready to go to a much, much more learning environment. And that's been great for us. And like I said before, our guiding principles is it's learning over production. We're not making a lot of parts on any given day. So let's actually make this into a learning experience. We put our students over any process. So we've revised a lot of our policies over the last years. And we always listen to feedback to our students if something is not working. I'm super excited. We have 3 students working, starting next week actually, working with us in the shop spaces. And again, they're going to actually do a lot of stuff in the spaces, and they have control over that. So if somebody says, you know what, I don't like how this space is set up, there's actually a lot of control that we give to the students to actually think about making the spaces better. And again, a lot of that is empathy over efficiency. We care that this is a community space. So we have, we have the shop assistants being there as another area where students can feel safe and supported.
So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the library's mission, and I would be happy to have any of you come visit us, both the library and the shops. I'm like inviting people to Daniela's space for her. But please come to the library. We completed a renovation over last summer, and we're very happy with the way that things have turned out. But we are also sort of in an eternal mode of tinkering with it and trying to come up with better uses of the space that mirror what the community wants. And so our strategic plan value statement is that we want to create community, inspire ideas, and enhance access. We advocate for discovery, connection, and inclusion for all members of our community. These are quotes directly from our strategic plan. I know that I wrote it. Else who I have one colleague, and she was out for a lengthy maternity leave, so I was kind of like running the show myself, but it's all good. And we offer free access to information and equipment. And we also think about space as something that is in our collection. And so we have very little kind of public underused or like unprogrammed space on campus. Olin is a very tiny place. There's three buildings on campus that are not dorms. And the library takes up 2 floors and sort of like the first building that you see when you first come on campus, often on admission tours. And so we don't have a student center. We don't have a lot of spaces where students can kind of, hang out and do things in a way that's not attached to a classroom or isn't in their dorms. So the library is very much the place where it's a third place for them, right? It's where they go when they're not working and they're not at home. And we also think about, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, the continuous development of social consciousness, creativity, and self-awareness. And so in our collection development guiding principles, I don't know how to make that less big, I'm sorry. We respond to traditional library item requests like books and DVDs, but we also buy a lot of devices and tools. And again, the way that this kind of gets constrained is things that make sense for the environment and make sense for us. We have some culling of our collection to do. The original Library of Things was planned by some very exuberant, mostly student sort of oriented folks who wanted to buy a whole bunch of audiovisual equipment for our students to be able to document the projects that they're making, because it's a huge part of what they do with us, right, is they want to be able to make portfolios and show prospective employers the stuff that they work on. And we've sort of realized over time that, there are better ways for that space to be used by things that people will actually use. In 2015, when a lot of that stuff was bought, people didn't have like a incredibly powerful camera in their pocket at all times. And so we're trying to reorient some of this stuff to make sense for the current moment. But some of the things that I have bought recently for students include a microscope, space binoculars, which are a thing. We just made a board game collection. Finally, it's something I've been meaning to do for a while, and this year I just pulled the trigger on it. And then I mentioned too, that as part of our collection, the library is not especially large, as you might guess, for a school that is very tiny. It's only about 8,000 square feet on 2 floors. And we've done what we can to try to have multiple types of uses in a very small confined area. And that has meant doing some strategic stuff around like making the first floor, or the upper floor, but on the first floor of the building, is where we sort of see programs and clubs and events and things like that happening. It's very wide open. The little bit of shelving that we do have up there is very reconfigurable. We have turned that space into a mini lecture hall, into an art gallery, into a dance floor over time. And then on our lower level is where our stacks kind of hang out, but then we also have the workroom, which is the vinyl cutter and screen printer, and our sewing machine. And as I say here on the slide too, we will consider adding just about anything to our circulating collection. Again, kind of keeping in mind that idea of safety and things that are appropriate to use in the library. One thing that Danielle and I are going to be working on this summer is consolidating our tool collection between the two of us and taking it out of the library, not because hand tools are an especial risk, but because no one is actually sitting in the library and using those hand tools. They're taking them to their dorms, they're taking them to the classrooms, and so they're sort of just taking up space on a shelf in the library that could be better programmed for other types of uses. And we're working both with her team of 3 students and my team of 4 students this summer to get some of that work done. I should note too, we don't actually teach classes in the summer. We have summer stipends for students who come to work for us, and usually in the capacity of research. And we are doing this kind of space planning pilot research project this summer. So what I'll be doing with my group of 4 is teaching them about how to execute a space redesign. And that will take, the form of doing different field trips to other types of institutions where there is community that's being built and fostered, and different types of uses are accommodated. They're not mostly doing work for me because we just renovated and pretty happy with the library space. They're doing a couple small projects where they'll just be helping us like create the custom furniture we need for our wacky Library of Things collection, which I'm really excited about. And also to just think about the user experience of our collections. To think like, not necessarily do I need to completely blow this whole thing up and build a completely new structure, but how do I make this process a little bit easier for my colleagues? And this makes me really excited because my sort of like basis as a librarian is all in user experience and design, and I really have the experience of being able to how things. And so yeah, we both in the shops and in the library emphasize access to space. This is the first floor in the library, and you can see it's very wide open space. This was for a parents' weekend that happened in the fall, and we're very used to turning, like I said, this space into a lecture hall, dance floor, art gallery, whatever the space sort of Daniela, do you want to take over for a bit here while I try to minimize your thing again? Oh, wait, there we go. I did it. Cool.
No. So there's actually a lot of natural overlap between what Cal and I are trying to do, and again, we have some markers of a makerspace, right? Like we're trying to be a collaborative space. We're somewhat oriented differently than a makerspace, that we do have much more of the traditional shop machine tools, where people can lose fingers. But in general, the idea is that we are part of the curriculum. So for us, it is very important that both Cal and I look at actually what's happening in the curriculum and make decisions around what the space and the tools and sort of the equipment that lives in this space, how that actually connects up to the curriculum. And we've done a lot of thinking about, the types of equipment that we purchase for the shop spaces. In particular, are there new classes that are happening? I'm pretty excited. There's a material science class that is going to look at plastic recycling. So I ended up buying them a little plastic extruder, which is pretty fun. But just thinking through what types of experiences do we want our students to have? And we've been making decisions around that. And, as part of that is we really want to make sure that we're part of the curriculum, not just an add-on. And both of our spaces focus on student growth and development, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second when we talk about our student assistance.
Yeah, and I want to just put a pin in that, the plastic extruder that Daniela mentioned, because this is part of a really cool project. There's a class called, I never remember the S's in 4S. We call it 4S as a shorthand. System, Sustainability, something.
Society, something.
Science, maybe, I don't know. It's a great class, though, taught by 3 of our wonderful colleagues. And I was really interested in how that class was approaching ethics instruction. So I kind of joined up as like a subject matter expert for most of the semester, and spent a lot of time visiting in that class. And this gave me a really sort of 360 view into what students are actually learning in a way that helps me get inspired about the services that we do. And the students in 4S, this little group, made a PLA plastic, is like the stuff, the filament that is used to make 3D printing objects. They found a way to recycle this filament by blending it with a blender. Not a blender. They use the paper shredder first. They use a paper shredder that they modified to run the plastic fibers into, and then they use a blender, I think. And then they use, there's some tools that we have, the plastic extruder and a Filobot, which is a thing that sort of weaves it into a roll for people to put in a 3D printer. And so we have this self-contained plastic recycling unit that our students built in 1 semester, which is amazing. It's not completely like 100% there. They're doing like a 50% recycled PLA, 50% virgin PLA pellets composite. But they made this very elaborate documentation scheme. So like even once they go on after they leave Olin, there will still be people who can maintain it. And so here's a little shot of some activities that the library has done. In the left-hand side here, we did a project with we used to have an artist in residence program at Olin that we're trying to come up with ways to sustain, but we had a master weaver as our artist in residence in 2020, 2021, and she worked with a student on creating a laser cut loom kit, which you can see the pieces of in that picture on the left, and these fit into this little nice floral baggie that she bought from IKEA. And we did a community weaving workshop with these. We had about 40 participants in this. My student workers, so this is one of my student workers here, they helped us pop out the pieces from these laser cut things because they weren't fully cut through. And we spent a couple days in the library assembling these kits. And then that culminated in one of my former colleagues in the library, who was a fabric artist, collaborated with this weaver, and we did a community workshop for about 40 participants. And one of our colleagues, who is a physicist by training, is now like obsessed with weaving, and she teaches her own fabric arts classes on campus. It's like a total success story for us engaging our colleagues. We do a lot of very like basic making stuff too, and kind of looking back at those quotes that I introduced you to this topic with, that there are some things that are not considered to be making because, you know, they're more feminized, or they're more crafty, or they just seem like they're not the real deal. But we love to do that, those kinds of not the real deal making things. We make name tags here in this picture in the middle, and then on the right here, we did a mask tie-dyeing event. So we did this a couple times. We just bought little bottles of tie-dye and a bunch of blank white masks for students to dye in whatever way they wanted to, and we had all the equipment for them to do that outside. It was a nice program to do while we were still like aggressively socially distanced, and are, you know, going to be doing that again probably. But you know, at the time, the first time we did this, it was like one of the first programs we had done in person, and it felt safe because we were outside and were able to distance easily out there. And something else I want to mention is that in June in the library, we always have a wonderful pride display created by our student workers, and they do a lot of, you know, kind of craftier type stuff to make this happen. In this picture here, you can see the trans pride flags they made with Post-it notes, and this little rainbow scarf that was woven around our llama. We have lots of little llamas in the library. It's a long story that I can tell you about some other time. And we also have mice in the library, which are these little, and they're not real mice. We don't have vermin, but we do have stuffed mice. And these are two of the stuffed mice here, including Remy, who's on the left, and Old Town Rat, who's on the right. And we're kind of obsessed with them. But this was a thing that the students at Olin just started doing. Like, when I started working at Olin, that summer, the library rats appeared. And there's now like, you know, 80, 90 of them. And they have Rattober, which is the yearly festival of making your own rats in the library. And that winds up being a really good opportunity for us to teach them how to use sewing machines. Okay, your turn, Daniela.
Yeah, we're a little bit more traditional in that regard, in terms of the making and the fabricating thing. But what I'm really proud of is this connection between our lab spaces and the shop spaces. So this is a former student honor who decided to make he's sort of on the top, who decided to make a cheese knife out of cheese. And yes, that's actually a thing. You can make knives out of cheese. And so he ended up using our confocal microscope upstairs to take pictures of the actual metal that he made, and then he used our forge to, essentially blacksmith the cheese knife that had casein integrated into the metal, and then he used the shop space to actually grind and make it sharp. So that's one opportunity that our students use, and then certainly we have some liberal arts classes here at Olin. They're a little bit far and few. Most of our students end up taking Wellesley or Babson classes, but we do have a class called Biology, Art, and Technology, and so this student made a kiwi out of wood. So, again, those connections are for us fairly natural in our curriculum.
More pictures of the community weaving workshop. This was actually, along with the mass tie-dyeing, one of the first programs we did together in some form in April 21. And we had a contingent of people who were on Zoom as well. So we had about 15 people in the library and 35 people on Zoom.
So, and from the shop side of things, we supported that project by essentially enabling the students to make lots and lots of prototypes throughout that entire process of coming up with that loom design.
Yeah, and ultimately we outsourced the laser cutting, right, for the actual mass production. Yeah. And so that is an option that y'all may have already taken advantage of in your own makerspaces, that if you don't have the capacity to actually build something in-house, there are companies that can help you do that. And so that was how we got 50 of these looms once they had been prototyped. I will say, though, as a caveat that we did have to do a lot of finagling to actually get them out of the wood when we got them. Luckily for me, all of my student workers had already been shop trained, and so when they needed to run through them with a saw, they were able to do so when that was necessary. But this was a really wonderful opportunity to bring people together, and I know it's kind of dark on that slide here, but there's two of my student workers, a student who's not one of my student workers, and one of our former colleagues who no longer works with the college, but an employee is there. And we had a really nice mix of class years, staff, and faculty as a part of this community weaving workshop. And that was sort of the intent of the artist, was she was thinking about the sort of dual meaning of community weaving, right? And that's, I think, a really good way of explaining how we approach our making activities. And then something that we both agree on too is like having this really robust access to materials and equipment. And this is a picture of the shops here. Do you want us to go over for a sec here?
Yeah, so part of our visibility is really making our spaces legible. So 3 summers ago now, we essentially had students redesign our tool walls. And again, the idea is that these spaces can read very, they're intimidating because if you don't really know what's what, a lot of folks will be lost in these spaces. So we purposely set out to make these spaces more visible and more readable. And now all of our tool walls, instead of things just being in random drawers, they're now up on the wall. They're clearly labeled. The other nice thing for us, it's easy to spot if something is missing. So we've been trying to, again, push sort of the envelope on visibility, not just sort of who's in the spaces, but also how these spaces are being read.
Yeah, and the stewardship piece is an ongoing challenge for sure. And it's something that, as I think about how orientation for our incoming students is going to look like in the fall, I feel like it's very important, given my experience of the last year, especially with the amount of disruption that these students have, to inculcate that sense of stewardship and cleaning up after yourself. I have had to take more dining hall dishes back to the dining hall this semester than I ever have in the 3 years previous. So I think we need to do a little bit of extra attention on this. And I'm going to show you the library makerspace areas and library of things quickly before I hand it back to Daniela, who will show you some more detailed pictures of the shops and the materials that are available too. So this is the sewing area. It's not the best picture imaginable. There's actually a large millwork table that's this guy on the right here has about 5 sewing machines on it and a serger. My student workers who are coming next week are going to be helping me completely rethink how this area looks. And right now we're using a lot of repurposed furniture from other spaces. It may come to pass that their recommendation is we just go to the Container Store or IKEA and just buy stuff that already exists, or they might want to get creative and start fabricating their own furniture. And the reason why I don't really know the answer to that is I need to see what these guys want to do. I'm not going to tell them what to do. I want to see where their kind of creative process takes them. And also some of them have an interest in being industrial designers where they would need to know how to fabricate furniture, so it's a learning opportunity for them as well. And here is the camera wall on the left. Again, this shelf was created in the shops. And actually everything you see here, a lot of the shelving, is modified library shelving that was changed around with CNC milled wood pieces. And we have, the existing sort of diagrams for those so we can reprint those as needed. But my thought now is I don't really want them to keep reinventing or tweaking this thing that already exists, because this was a kind of different mode of using the library. And we really want to get their impression and their creativity on this rather than just sort of recycling someone else's ideas. I also find that is what engineers want to do in my experience. They really like to make their own thing instead of do someone else's thing. So we're going to be rethinking those areas over the summer. But again, what we were trying to do here was make sure these things weren't in a closet or behind a desk or somewhere that they were inaccessible. And yeah, it can get a little messy sometimes. Things do go missing, for sure. But it's better this than them having to come to one of my staff members, which is me and one other person and we don't really work at the front desk anyway, for permission to use these things. And here's the workroom. This was when it was in a particularly messy state. But one thing that we like to do in the workroom is actually let students display the stuff that they make up on the wall. And this is a huge piece of the community building, community stewardship, making things visible, giving inspiration to each other, and giving these sort of multiple ways into making. So what you see here is mostly screen prints, but there's also vinyl cut stickers. There's also little things that students have doodled. We really just kind of let them, go wild with it. And then periodically what we'll do is we will take things down and we'll just kind of start afresh. And that gives them just like a continual sense of ownership of the space and an ability to display their artwork somewhere. All right, back to the shops.
Yeah, so like I said, our shops are a little bit more traditional. Over the past couple of years, we've been working with paint to actually make the space a little bit more friendly. And we have more safety considerations than the library, so we need to be more aware of fume extraction. Certainly with the welding area, we do have those curtains hanging up, but that is again also a safety precaution. But yeah, in general, these spaces are pretty busy and they can get packed, especially towards the end of the semester. So what we're really trying to think about is what can we actually enable our students to do in them? Are there signs? I think personally the paint has helped reduce some of that anxiety of being in the spaces by making them bright and cheerful. So that's been a really good thing that we've been doing. It's just easy fixes like that. A little bit of paint actually goes quite a long ways. And then, so the other thing that we have available right outside of the shop spaces is a little stock market. Most of that is just things you would find at Home Depot, so nuts, bolts, screws, that sort of things. But essentially at 3 a.m. in the morning when you're building your thing in a classroom, there's hardware for you to use. It's free to the students. We don't charge anything. And then we have some stock available. And that will actually be one of the projects we're tackling this summer, is rethinking the stock market, because right now we have this range of materials available. Not everything gets used, and so we want to focus in on what they actually need out of this stock market. And again, it's free for them to use. It just comes out of my operating budget.
And we have a similar approach in the library too. Essentially, students have to pay nothing to the library ever. We don't charge fines. We don't charge replacement fees. I will say, we are in a financial place where it is feasible for us to do that. I also have an endowed fund to help me pay for some of the tool upkeep. But that said, because we have the ability to do that, we do really emphasize making sure that students have what they need to do their projects, instead of being like, you have to pay us. I mean, this is also in part because I do not have the staffing or the patience to deal with some kind of system where they pay us for things. Sometimes we do encourage, like if students are doing something with extremely expensive fabric that is a personal project, they usually will just go and buy that stuff of their own accord without us having to ask them to. But if a student were to ask me about that, I would probably direct them to that. And I try to be consistent too, whenever those things come up. But for the most part, we are able to offer them vinyl, which is expensive, but we just buy it in like huge rolls. That makes it a little bit cheaper. We buy screen printer ink. We buy lots of fabric, thread, lots of things for fabric arts making. And we'll get pretty much anything they ever ask us that is a crafting supply. And so we have a huge variety of stuff like that. We have all your standard like paints and paint brushes and easels and glue, lots of different types of paper. We have lots of different like specific types of things to make as well, like buttons. Like this is a button made in the library. Y'all may already know this from your own experience, but students love making buttons and they're obsessed with it. So we supply everything for our button makers. And again, if someone comes to me with a request for something to be added, typically we'll say yes. And kind of keeping in mind appropriateness, but for the most part, if a student asks me to buy watercolor paper and watercolor paint, And in the last chunk here, we're going to talk about how we do this with our students and how we have this culture of shared expertise and ownership both in the shops and in the library. And I'm going to pass it to you again, Daniela.
Yeah, as I said before, we have 16 to 22 shop assistants working for us, and one of the things that we do is actually we bring them on campus a week before the semester starts and essentially run we call it boot camp, but it's a week-long immersion of what they need to be doing. So there's certainly a part of, hey, let's just get the space set up, cleaned, ready to go for the semester. We also take the time to train them on the tools, but then we also spend some time on bias training, first aid training, and a whole bunch of other um, bits and pieces that enables them to be an efficient and effective shop assistant for us. And so over the last couple of years, we've done LGBTQ training for our shop assistants. We've had the Office of Diversity and Inclusion come in and give us a talk. So we're trying to bring in those types of speakers of events for our shop assistants. We certainly have thought a lot around our hiring, so we want to make sure that when we hire students, their main focus is teaching and helping others, not around access to the spaces. And so being a shop assistant, actually, we give you prox card access for using the spaces after hours. So there's a little bit of a privilege that comes with being a shop assistant. The other thing that we do is we have these tiles in front of the space that are essentially, they show you who's working in the space. And so we have pronouns on all of them. We also bought patches, identity and pronoun patches for the shop aprons that the students work. And so there's been this visible shift in who is in the space and who the shop is for. So we're pretty proud of enabling our students to bring themselves to the space. And so, like Helen said, at Olin, there's a strong sense of ownership by the students. And so we engage, it's been, 4 summers now that I've engaged with the students over the summer. They are amazing and incredible. I feel like we always get a lot of stuff done, from printing posters to painting, just to making things happen. And again, so sort of these continuous shop improvement projects can only happen over the summer when we're not as busy. We still have some research to support, but by and large, the college quiets down pretty nicely. We have playlists, we have a Slack channel for communication. So it's really a space where the students do own quite a bit of the culture and then what's happening in the space. And the professional staff and myself, we're there to enable them, make sure everything is safe and ready to go. But by and large, the students are, they're owning the space.
And this is true for the library as well. We use Discord and not Slack. That's the big difference. But one thing that I'm considering is, this is actually, I've been at Olin mostly during pandemic times, and we did not have regular summer students for a while. But I'm thinking about doing a similar sort of fellowship program with the students who are working with me this summer and or going forward, where they kind of keep coming back year after year, because I do feel in the way that I run the library with my library assistants, there's an enormous benefit to them and to me for them to stay longer than just a semester or just a year. So I typically don't hire people for just one semester, and I almost always hire them again after their first year, unless if for some reason they don't want to keep working, which is usually because they're just busy with other things. It's not because they've had a bad experience, because I'm probably one of the most lenient and snacks providing bosses that could possibly exist, because I'm completely wrapped around their fingers. Because I get to be a cool aunt. Like, that's the role of the academic librarian, is you're the cool aunt on campus. And so with my students, at this point, I have sort of like a senior and a junior level library assistant job. I like to have people who are upperclassmen and who've worked with me for a few years to keep coming back just because it's easier for me to train them. They can train other library assistants in a way that I don't have to, and that's great. Also, usually for our Makerspace area experts, they want to keep coming back because it's their passion, whatever it is that they're doing. Our sewing machine expert is like a great example of this. We don't tend to hire people who are in their first year at Olin, and this is mostly because of their time commitments and their need to sort of flex their wings and see what type of things they want to get their hands dirty with once they're on campus. But I am working with a rising sophomore over the summer, and I wanted, part of that was intentional. I wanted there to be a diverse array of classes represented in my summer team. And this is in response a little bit to the fact that until 2020, our students all knew each other. They all knew each other, no matter what year they were in, because there's 361 students at Olin. It's a very tiny place. And then over the course of the pandemic years, that sort of, that knowledge of each other has diminished a little bit from class to class. And so again, coming back to the idea of community development and engagement, I want to sort of bridge some of those gaps in the student body. And here's some quotes specifically about the shop, Daniela.
Yeah, I don't want to read them.
Yeah,
but,
that's fine.
Again, our shift has been very much from, the shop being somewhat exclusive. Only you can use the space if you have, a course-specific part to make. To really, hey, I just want to learn how to laser cut. Go ahead and go do it. So it's really been a nice shift of, again, it's becoming a learning space. Everybody, there's on the order of 80% of our students are now laser cutting trained, which is amazing. Similar probably for 3D printing. So again, we're pulling in a lot of students. It's been great to see the shift from male dominated to really making sure that everybody feels comfortable in our space.
Yeah, we have 3 slides left, so we're almost there. So I want to show you some more examples of the collaborative work being everywhere on campus, both outside of the shops and in the shops and in the library. On the left, all of us faculty and staff, as well as students, have the opportunity to be green shop training, which is just a few, basic sort of fabrication machines that we learn how to use that we do need supervision for. And there are these little tags that we all make, and then we paint with our names on them at the end of it, and we hang them up in the wall of the academic center for everyone to see. And mine is on there somewhere. I think it's actually the second one from the bottom on the right, because I can see it a little bit better up here. And then in the middle, we had a visiting artist on campus this year who was really helpful in helping me come up with creative, artistic programming to engage the community. The student body was having a really hard time with processing the conflict in Ukraine. And one thing that we decided to do for an afternoon on campus was just give them an opportunity to just make together in a space where there was no agenda, there was no, assignment or lecture or anything like that. Just sit here and be together and make something together, keep your hands busy. And in the right here, former library sewing expert made this Post-it note crane. Olin is a very Post-it note oriented culture. And we also have a really beautiful culture of sustainability on campus. So this student had a project where she collected boxes of Post-it notes for people to voluntarily put their Post-its in when they were done with whatever they were doing with them. And then she and a bunch of her friends folded 8,000 origami cranes out of them and hung them off of this beautiful bamboo sculpture. This used to be in the main lobby of the building where the library is, and unfortunately fell from many stories. But then the students, were like, you can't get rid of this. We need this. It has to exist. So right now it is above the sewing area in the library, kind of as an homage to our former student worker who made it. And so now we're to major takeaways here, and we'll just very quickly go through these. So in these pictures here, you see the library, and is that a QEA project at the bottom?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, quantitative engineering analysis series of classes that Oliners have to take where they make a boat in their first year, right?
Yes.
Okay, yep. And then the top here, this was another project that our visiting artist did. It was an old school animation night, and it's hard to see, but these are these little pieces of paper on a stick that you flip back and forth, and you make a little animated scene happen. And she was brought on to do some storytelling specific work on campus, so she showed students all these different creative ways to use old school animation tactics to tell their stories. And so, you know, we have a very similar mission, and we see ourselves as being part of the continuum where we have this sense of intentional community building, providing services, tools, and space. And we don't silo. You know, we very much are a complementary sort of group of people with the shop and library, because we just can't do it all individually ourselves. And it doesn't really make sense for us to. It also gives multiple points of entry to making for our students. And we are deeply integrated with the curriculum and students. This isn't just us having the stuff that they need to be able to create things. We are really there with them every step of the way, and how they use it, how they learn from it. And so last slide here. Do you want to take this one, Daniela?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so we're intentionally designing of what we're trying to do. Again, I think the summer fellowships are sort of one example, but we're really thinking about aligning our tools within our spaces. So, for example, the 3D printers used to be in the library. There was some noise and smell complaints, so now they're living in a hallway closer to the shop. It enabled the students that, they're employed under the shop, but they would repair the 3D printers in the library to actually be closer to the place where they actually are repairing them. So that made a lot of sense. We're I'm super excited to work with Callan this summer on, like Callan was just saying, on the space design. And for me, I'm just more of a floater, a support type role. I'll make sure that the students have all of the things they need fabrication-wise. Certainly we'll give them some advice on building the furniture. But again, there's, we're helping each other out, trying to make sense of what we're trying to do. And again, we've collaborated on trainings and safety procedures. 4 summers ago, we had a large project that essentially went through all of our tool collections, and the students came up with, what training documents are missing. So now we have a standardized template essentially for our training that we can apply to sewing machines, we can apply to our typical machine shop tools. And so we have, it's collaborative in that way that we're using that same format.
Yeah, I'll just, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say quickly, too, one thing that partnering with each other has enabled us to do is to contribute a lot to the rest of the college. So I didn't explain this in great detail, but my student workers who are working for me this summer, while they're doing a couple tiny little library things, are mostly going to be working on redesigning a space for our senior capstone projects. Those students who are in those classes have been moved into a windowless basement at the side of the hill that used to be an IT space. And it is so woefully not the right place for them to be doing the sort of work they need to do in the capstone, where they're collaborating, having video calls, things like that. And so because we have this partnership, we're able to serve the rest of the institution. Because we have Daniela's skills and the ability to utilize shop assistants in projects, as well as having the manpower for this team of library workers to do this work. And this is now the second time I have worked for a non-library department on space planning stuff. So it's a good way for the library to sort of, market its user-centered nature to the rest of the institution. Because I've worked both before my job at Olin and during it as a space redesigner. So those are things that a lot of us do, even if we don't formally think of ourselves as being space planners or designers. We're often moving things around. We're often responding to patron requests for things. We're often thinking about new furniture to buy for the next 10, 20 years that'll be more flexible and more appropriate for our patrons. So just putting that out there too. And yeah, I guess we should wrap it up. And like we said, we need more data to drive decisions on this. There needs to be more research done in this area. We are putting in a paper for a conference in the fall where we're sort of going to be inviting people to be thinking about demographics a little bit more specifically, especially around gender identity and gender inclusivity. And thank you all for maintaining through the tech debacle at the beginning and being with us today. I really appreciate it. You can contact either one of us with questions, and we'll make sure that these slides get out to you soon. Have a nice little list of references here, too, for you to check out as well. So thanks so much, and thanks, Daniela, for joining us via Zoom.